About a month to the deadline given by the Central Bank of Nigeria for the phasing out of old Naira notes. The new Naira notes is still not in full circulation. Nigerians are still being issued the old notes over the counter from automated teller machines. The banks say there is not enough of the new notes to go round. And for the few who now possess the new Naira notes, spending it has now become a challenge, as many business owners are rejecting the currency as a means of payment. In the meantime, Governor of the CBN, Godwin Emefiele, has directed that more new notes be printed. The Apex Bank admitted to not printing enough copies of the new Naira. Mr. Emefiele says only 5 million copies were initially printed, and another batch of 5 million copies will be printed to address the shortfall. Joining us now is a public affairs analyst, Femi Lawson. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning.
And via Zoom is financial analyst Akin Omishade. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast. Mr. Omishade, can you hear me? All right. While we wait to hear from Mr. Mishade, let's begin our conversation with Femi Lawson in the studio. Now, the CBN has given its reasons why there seems to be a shortfall. One would have expected that the CBN knows what would be enough, being an institution that has been handling all of this, but coming to say that they are going to print more. I mean, what do you make of the back and forth that is happening?
No, it really sounds funny because this was the same bank that told Nigerians that about 84% of our currency in circulation were in the hands of individuals and not in commercial banks.
Yes.
Meaning that you already have the knowledge of what you are attempting to replace. You want to get this about 84% of our currency in circulation back into the banks and replace them with a new note. Then why, at the time that people are expecting a total implementation, why we are drawing closer to the time when you said these old notes are not going to be useful any longer, that you are coming out to say that you have only printed 5 million copies of the new note that is expected to replace 84% of your currency that is in circulation? It shows that the CBN did not factor time into what it's planned to do. It did not also factor the reality into what it's planned to do, and that is why days to the deadline that it has given by itself, the notes are nowhere to be found. Just a few days ago, I was in a bank, and for every 100,000 withdrawal you make, you only get 20 of the new notes, even being documented. And it tells you that we are just like in a trial period. Maybe they are still conducting sampling, because as at now, this note was unveiled November 23. And of course, it has been in the banks since the early week of December. And we are working towards the deadline given by the CBN itself. And the CBN is now admitting that it is in a rush to print more notes. And it has not shifted the deadline for phasing out these old notes. It's unfair.
All right, let me bring Akin Omishade in here. Can you confirm that you can hear us now? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I've been able to hear you. Good morning, and compliments of the season to you in the studio.
Same to you. It's really nice to hear your voice after a while. Now, let's get to this issue. A lot of persons have seen with the latest, observations from Nigerians that they can't see enough of the new currencies in circulation. Some people are beginning to see that the cashless policy of the Central Bank of Nigeria, their intended policy, is what they want to kick in by creating a scarcity of the new notes by the time the 31st of January comes, where people don't see the new notes in circulation enough, then they will be forced to go into the cashless policy by bank transfers and all of those. Is that what you're seeing here?
Well, I caught some of the comments of the last contributor. What I am seeing is a reflection of what the contributor had said. There's just not enough of these new notes, just not enough. If you are looking at withdrawing 85% of old notes or unbanked monies, and you don't even have up to 25% of the new notes to exchange for it, you are creating a very bad bottleneck. And what you're going to have is, who are those that make use of the cash the most, that you want to now transport into the cashless lane, into the cashless pool? These are people that contribute to the moving of the economy, the one I call the black economy. How do we make use of that with the market women, the farmers in the hinterlands, the commuters every day that need this money? How many people make use of transfers at the petrol station? Even if you go to the supermarkets, the high supermarkets, the Spars and the ShopRites and the mega plazas, how many people, many of the population, the population that will actually drive the cashless society are the Generation Z, the Gen Zs, the millennials. And you and I know that the millennials have moved so far ahead of the system. And what do I mean by that? The millennials, if the cashless society that you are talking about, which is also expected to drive the e-Naira, is of the same value as the Nigerian Naira. Now, if you have 100,000 Naira today, would you move it to the e-Naira, which is of the same value, although backed by the state? Or as a 25-year-old or as a 22-year-old who is tech savvy, would you move it to the e-Naira, or would you move it to the cryptocurrency platform or the Bitcoin platform? So there's a challenge. The people that are going to suffer the most are the unbanked, and they constitute about 58-59% of the economy. So how are you going to move the woman that does not even have a BVN, that depends on a cash inflow, a daily cash inflow, and force that woman to go to the bank? And if you look at it, there's been no real education. This policy has been around not just this year, but there's been no real education. Also, you want to force people into a cashless platform, but there's no trust, because the average Nigerian who will probably take it on, and that's from the lower middle class to the upper middle class, will be the ones that will say, okay, before I start to educate, but there's no trust. So it might be an indirect or a backdoor manner of forcing us all to go cashless and saying, okay, we'll create an artificial scarcity. But there's a downside to creating that artificial scarcity to force us to a cashless society, because you see, what will happen is you're going to create a further hyperinflation, because the denominations that are being made available is in the thousands. You don't have as much as the 500, the lower denomination, the 500 or the 200. So what will happen? The people are now going to say, I'm going to buy something of 800 Naira. But there's no 200 Naira or 100 Naira to make the difference. So everything goes up. So it's a balancing thing that the federal government and especially the CBN governor has to critically look into.
Right. Let's bring the conversation back into the studio. From what he's saying, it seems the CBN is not fully prepared for what it's planned to do, because he says there's no trust, the level of awareness is not as much, and then if it's a backdoor measure to move us into the cashless policy, there might be hyperinflation and all of it. Then one would ask, why the rush? What is the end game for the CBN with all of this if we haven't put in place what is necessary to make this move seamlessly?
Well, I think it's a reflection of the fact that if you look at most people who are in the public sector governance in Nigeria, they have always found it difficult to differentiate between running a public sector and running their private businesses, even though some of them are from the private sector background. And that is what is being reflected in what is happening now. You are dealing with a population of about 200 million people. We are dealing with a population where a large sector dealing with your currency are in the informal sector, but you are operating as if you are governing in a private sector with limited number of customers, with limited number of employees, that you can easily sit in a boardroom and take decisions without considering the consequences. If you have considered the huge sum of money in the informal sector in the country, if you have considered the fact that you have to educate a lot of people about this, you will come to realize that this cannot be achievable in 60 days. But unlike what we are currently witnessing, I mean, there are still Nigerians who are rejecting these notes today, just
Absolutely,
like you said.
yeah.
Because a lot of our people are not even aware. A lot of people who are aware of this were people who have access to the media, to the new media, who were actually part of the conversation around the first 2 weeks that this policy came on board. A lot of people in the hinterland are not even aware. So when you go to the villages today and you present them, this new Naira note, they may think you are bringing a counterfeit, currency to them. So you must design the time for implementation. And for this population of 200 million people, a population that only a very few have access to the internet, to information, you realize that you should have done more of national orientation in letting the people know that within so time frame, this is what
could have been a better time frame to address
I would
this?
have expected that this should have run at least through 6 months between the period the bank was contemplating this and where it is setting a deadline. I think this is not achievable, especially when you look at the huge sum of our currency that is outside the bank vaults. The CBN admitted this. And you have not
85%.
pumped enough, you understand, to replace this. So it's practically impossible to achieve. And this, you may say, a lot of time we hear this money is in the hands of politicians, and it's practically impossible for politicians to even have 50% of this amount that is outside, the banks in their hands. It's not, these are realities. A lot of these funds are in the hands of the ordinary people of Nigeria, the traders, people in the informal sector, the farmers, the travelers so a lot of them are not actually in the hand of politicians. But you think it is in the hand of politicians and we can get this back in 30 days, good. It would have been easy. But now the reality is that these funds are not in the hand of politicians alone. A large quantity of these funds are in the hands of the ordinary people who are not informed enough about this policy, and that is why it is becoming so difficult. For every teller machine you visit today, it is still the old bank notes. For every bank you visit, so there's no progress being made. So the CBN has to sit back and review the time, frame set for this, the implementation of this policy. All
right, let me bring Akim back in here. Now, the point there is, the assumption is that a lot of money is moved during elections, and like Femi has said, of course, politicians have a chunk of it, but they don't have everything. But the assumption from the statements or the reports coming out of the Central Bank of Nigeria at the initial stage was that this timing is strategic because of the monies that move before elections. And as it is, one would say the timing, if it's anything to go by, would you say this timing is strategic so that monies that politicians move during hundreds of billions of monies that politicians move cash during elections can all be sent back into the system? Would you say this as strategic or otherwise?
Well, it is strategic, and we've read that meaning or that, that essence of this policy into what the central bank is doing. The central bank has said that there's too much money, 85% of the currency are unbanked, and that is why it is. It is us, the citizens, that are reading that it is strategic as to the timing of the election. We all know, we have to be truthful with ourselves. We all know that electioneering in Nigeria is cash and carry. And we've moved even beyond the Naira to the US dollar. And you realize that when this policy came into being, or the activation of this policy, it affected the Naira to the dollar exchange rate. Now, on election date, we all know that money moves around. So it's no news. That is, unfortunately, our own type of democracy that we practice, or the politics that we practice in Nigeria. It is true, money moves around. But then, the amount of money that will move around pre-election and on the election days is not comparable to what is moving around in the economy for the whole period. okay, we're going to have the presidential and governorship elections soon. Monies are moving around now. Monies will move around on election day. What happens post-election day? What is happening to the citizens as of today? Are we going to, what if that is the main strategic essence of this policy? That means the government is deliberately killing the citizens, or using a sledgehammer to kill a small ant. Because elections will come, elections will go. The economy will still be there. So what is going to happen to the economy? Okay, and let us be on. Let me be truthful now. Let us hit the bullseye. We know who are the controllers of the banks. If you speak to the bankers today, they will tell you there are ways around the system. Now, if an influential politician requires 1 million, that's even a small amount of money to do a campaign in a day. If a politician requires 1 million naira today, he knows how to get that 1 million naira out. But that mechanic, that printer that wants to do a job for someone, he needs to buy products. Do you think he'll be able to get that 1 million naira easily? So if we're talking about it being to stop the politicians from spending money, the Nigerian mega politicians are not spending naira; they are spending US dollars, and we all know that. Look at what was reported during the presidential primaries. And I mean, if we need to call a spade and try to address our peculiar issues, then let's do that. Monies will move around. And let us be honest, I also believe if monies move around, everybody will have more money to spend. Fine. But then if you're interested in mopping the excess funds out, then let us, for instance, which country, and thankfully, I have traveled to so many countries. In the US, do you go to the ATM and withdraw $1,000 bill? In Europe, do you go to the ATM and withdraw 500 euros? It is only in a country like Nigeria that our highest denomination is the most popular denomination that you withdraw from the ATM. If you make it uncomfortable and say, okay, we're even going to make the 1,000 naira denomination less available, it becomes unwieldy for the politicians to carry 5 million in 200 naira notes, because of course it attracts attention. And whoever is receiving it, or whichever is the exchange method between the vote buying and the vote selling, it creates unnecessary attention and it becomes uncomfortable. But then the economy is still growing. The economy that is almost comatose is being revived. So there are so many factors that has to be considered in the holistic view of this scenario that the central bank is taking. That is my view. So if it's a strategy, well, you create one, it's like the proverbial roach. You kill one, 10 will come out.
Right. So bringing the conversation back into the studio now, how should the CBN have addressed this matter in the first place, such that we wouldn't be having the situation that we're having on our hands, especially also looking at building trust, having the unbanked banked, and then looking at perhaps building a seamless cashless policy?
Well, time is very important, because if you don't consider time in the implementation of this kind of policies, it is bound to fail, and just like we're almost experiencing now. And you see, there are some fundamental approach that this bank has to take, just taking from what Mr. Omishade just said. If you want to address the corruption part of it, you must be strategic. You cannot be addressing the corruption part of it, especially when you talk about how politicians abuse these currencies, without being strategic. You cannot continue to print 1,000 naira notes into your current, into your bank, and expect politicians to to get not to get away with what they are doing. Just like he said, if you have in circulation more of these lower denominations, 100, practically you can hardly find this 100 naira, 200 naira today. Even when you make purchases, it becomes very difficult. But everywhere you turn, you find the 1,000, the 500 available. So you are not being strategic if truly you want to deal with the question of corruption. So the bank has to be strategic in its approach. Let's have less of these higher denominations. Let's have more of this lower denomination of the currency. And like I said, time is very important. You must review the time frame that has been attached to these policies, because even if you want to railroad us back into the cashless policy, which is a fantastic idea, the truth is that time must be given. And the question of orientation of the citizens, like I said, this is public sector issue. It is not a private sector issue that can be easily handled within the confine of your management, just like in a bank or in a private business. You must consider some very sensitive public opinion. You must consider some very sensitive issue of national orientation and belief of the people into making
That's why
this
I asked,
kind of policies.
how do you build trust for the unbanked especially?
The bank must take it out of being an issue of the bankers committee or between an issue of federal government, CBN meeting with the president and people in government to engaging the citizens. How much of this engagement have the CBN had with the media since it started this? Have you watched? I'm not sure I've watched any advertorial on the television talking about sensitizing people about these new notes. How much of this is the CBN doing in terms of national orientation? How much of stakeholders' engagement with the media, with the civil society, on letting the people know the need for what it is doing? It's not enough to get the approval of the president and you think all Nigerians must swallow this. No, you must engage the citizens. And if you don't start doing that, then you continue to meet roadblocks along the line of the implementation. Nigerians must matter in whatever policy you are implementing, because it's about Nigerians.
All right.
It's not about the bank or the government.
All right.
All right. Akin, let me ask you this. The point there is, sometimes we see people hawk this new currencies at events. In fact, we've started seeing already some people hawking the new currencies, yet Nigerians are complaining we're not seeing them, but there are available very crisp notes for people at events, at weddings, marriages and all of that. We are seeing them already. Of course, these people wouldn't have gotten them from the streets. They'd have gotten them from some, through the system, because all the monies were issued through the banks. Now, talking about the bankers and the banks generally, do you see them as one of the most strategic partners in ensuring either a cashless policy or the availability of the new Naira notes to Nigerians, or otherwise?
Oh, definitely. You are spot on that. We have the commercial banks. We have the microfinance banks. We used to have the community banks. And what was the essence of the community banks that now became morphed into microfinance banks? The retail banking industry develops economies. Question, do we have a successful retail banking industry in Nigeria? And I just say we don't. If you look at banks' profits, where do they come from? They come from the SMS, the bank charges that they charge you and I. Fine, I don't have a problem with that. But then, you're talking about a situation where you want us all to make payments online, use SDS transactions, implement the e-Naira. But then, the majority of the users, the actors in that stage, have yet not been captured. The mama at Gota who sells bags of rice, the cattle seller, the motor park attendants, you look at them, they are 67 to 69% of the daily economy that we have in Nigeria. Have we captured them? How many banks can actually state that they have enough individual customers? The last contributor said Nigeria is 200 million. How much of that 200 million have accounts in Nigeria? How much of that 200 million operate with money or carry out transactions? That begins to tell you the effectual role that the financial institutions have to make. The commercial banks, the microfinance banks, those ones that deal every day with you and I. And when we talk about you and I, we also have to look at there's no enlightenment of this program. If you go to any bank today, would you see any enlightenment notice there saying this is why the central bank is doing this, or this is why this is why we are taking away this cash from the economy and replacing it with new cash?
All right.
All we're doing, what everybody says is we're just exchanging old notes for new notes. And if you still have that biased view from the users, that creates a difficult situation.
All right. Let's quickly bring it to the studio for your final take on this matter. I mean, we'll wrap things up quickly.
I think it's important for the CBN to review the time already attached to this policy. It is not realistic going by what we're currently experiencing, and it must do more to engage Nigerians on the need to accept this policy beyond just imposing it on us.
All right, we must thank you, Public Affairs Analyst Femi Lawson, as well as Financial Analyst Akin Omishade, for your time on the program. Thank you, gentlemen.